go ahead and get started. So thank you so much for joining us tonight at the University of the Arts. My name is Dr. Emily Mattingly, and I'm the director of the School of Critical Studies here at UArts. I just want to take a moment to share with you a brief overview of tonight's events, which promise thought-provoking explorations of timely issues of gender and sexuality. Tonight offers, really set the mood here. Tonight offers an opportunity to engage such issues critically, deeply, and perhaps uncomfortably with each other in a space that, at its core, values safety. This night will begin with a talk from Dr. Camille Paglia, University Professor of Humanities and Media Studies, who I will introduce very soon. Dr. Paglia's talk is titled Ambiguous Images, Sexual Duality, and Sexual Multiplicity in Western Art. Immediately after this talk, we will hold a discussion for members of the UArts community from 8:30 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. in Terra 905, which is right downstairs in this same building. This talk is going to be facilitated by Deja Lynn Alvarez, an experienced facilitator and trans activist and advocate, among other important or very important roles in this city. Refreshments will be served during this post-talk event, which will unpack Dr. Paglia's talk and offer attendees an inclusive space to discuss issues of gender broadly. To join this discussion and enter Terra 905, you must show your UArts ID card. Throughout the evening, during both the talk and discussion that will follow, free counseling services will be available to the UArts community should you need support. Counselors from the University of the Arts Counseling Center are available in Terra 1703 during the talk. And during the discussion on the 9th floor. In Terra 901 and 903. Yeah, perfect. They're going to be available from 7 to 10 tonight. I do need to address our policy here. The University of the Arts recognizes an individual's right to dissent and openly demonstrate on campus. However, demonstrations may not disrupt or obstruct any activities or programs, nor endanger the safety of any person at the university. We know that most people here are eager to hear Dr. Paglia's talk, and we ask you all to please respect our policy and act accordingly. So with no further ado, I thank you again for joining us tonight at the University of the Arts. I will now introduce Dr. Paglia. Camille Paglia is the University Professor of Humanities and Media Studies here at UArts, where she has taught since 1984. She received her BA from the State University of New York at Binghamton in 1968, and her Master's of Philosophy and PhD degrees from Yale University in 1971 and 1974, respectively. Her 8 books include Sexual Personae, Art and Decadence from Nefertiti to Emily Dickinson, published by Yale University Press, The Birds, a study of Alfred Hitchcock, released by the British Film Institute, Break, Blow, Burn, Camille Paglia reads 43 of the world's best poems, and Glittering Images, a journey through art from Egypt to Star Wars. Her most recent book, Provocations, a 700-page collection of her essays, was released last October. Professor Paglia was a co-founding contributor and columnist for Salon.com, beginning with its debut issue in 1995. She has written numerous articles on art, literature, popular culture, feminism, education, religion, and politics for publications around the world. Thank you.
myself, I was the first faculty member hired for the new University of the Arts when it was, the news of it was announced in 1984 to the Philadelphia Inquirer, and it was the vision of Peter Salmson, then president of the Philadelphia College of Art, to join with its next door neighbor, the Philadelphia College of Performing Arts. So there was a national search for a faculty member who had interdisciplinary interests and capacities. And I was, even though I still did not have a book accepted or published yet, the professors who were in charge of the humanities department at what we call the PCPA, the College of Performing Arts, saw the manuscript of my book, Sexual Personae, and were very interested in the material, so I was hired. Then it was like how many years after I arrived here? 1984 I arrived, and then 1990 finally Yale University Press published that book. It had been rejected by 7 publishers and 5 agents. So I think sort of my history is a good inspiration to those whose work is rejected early in their career, and I persisted, and this massive book, 700 page book that has now gone around the world. Let me tell you the translations, and this shows you how many chords it's striking abroad. Okay, we have translations: Japanese, Chinese, Korean, Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Dutch, Norwegian, German, Polish, Croatian, Serbian, and Turkish, and right now the Arabic translation is in the process. I think my strongest following is in Brazil. The Brazilians truly understand what I'm saying, which is this balance between art and nature, and the integration of the two, the contrast between the two. I think that the Brazilian tradition of carnival is, with its impersonations and so on, its masking, has been one reason why I think my ideas have struck home there. Now, in terms of other background here, my own, I think my work is, because it's so grounded in the study of history, that's why I think it has staying power, why it has had traction. And I think part of it is also my background. That is, I'm a product of an immigrant family. All 4 of my grandparents and my mother were born in Italy, and therefore they came from the countryside of the farming country of Italy. They were essentially members of the agrarian era. So they were brought to the United States to work in the Endicott Johnson shoe factory in upstate New York. Okay? It was a very hostile environment because this factory, which drew on Italians who had leatherworking skills, was surrounded by the old WASP people, the population of upstate New York. So there was a lot of a culture clash. I was really, my early years were spent in the real enclave of Little Italy. So then, obviously, in this factory town where I was raised, I had an experience of the industrial era, the next phase in the history of modern, society. And then my father was the first of his large blended family, like 10 people in it, to go to college because of the new state university system, the community college first, Triple Cities Community College, which is then turned into what is now the State University of New York at Binghamton. It's called Binghamton University now. And so then my father, they were married, and I was born. My father was attending college, working in the cafeteria and so on. So then he got a job as a high school teacher, and eventually a job as a teaching in a Jesuit school and college in Romance languages, Spanish and French are his specialty, in Syracuse. So therefore, I think what's unusual in my background, okay, is this experience of the agrarian period, okay, the industrial era, and then the new professional era that we live in right now. I think that gives me a tremendous kind of breadth, okay, to my work. Then the other thing is that my earliest interests were in archaeology, particularly ancient Egypt. And so I think in very, very long time frame, okay, in terms of, you know, not 10,000 years, okay, you know, to kind of time frame. I don't just look around contemporary society and decide, you know, what would be good, okay? So, all right. I don't take cues from contemporary society entirely. I'm always considering the rise and fall of civilizations, okay, worldwide. And I've done extensive, you know, research into world anthropology as well as, you know, biology. And so and I'm putting these things to use right now. My latest project, which I've been working on for 10 years, which is a research into the Native American legacy in our region, which is very neglected. And there's been much attention paid to the remnants of ancient Native American culture from the Ice Age in various other areas. For example, near Pittsburgh, there are some very major excavations, and northeast of Harrisburg also major excavations, but not here. So I've been trying to map the Native American presence at the close of the Ice Age in the Delaware Valley watershed. And this is what I do. I'm constantly finding remnants of Native American tools, knives, and all kinds of modifications made of the landscape, as well as major rocky outcroppings and so on. So again, you know, to me that is the thinking about the way people used to live, okay, for tens of thousands of years. I think that gives you a kind of detachment, from the present, from the hysterias of the present, the pressures of the present, okay? And it gives you just this long view, the long view of humanity, okay? Which I think is sorely lacking in so many people who aspire to be cultural analysts, but I think are too much afflicted by what's called presentism, that is being trapped in the present. Okay. All right. So now, before I go on, I should say that I should mention that in addition to those translations of my work, I had a big fan in David Bowie. Okay, David Bowie put my book, Sexual Personae, on his list of his 100 favorite books, right? And then I was asked to write and then Bowie wanted to put excerpts from Sexual Personae into his 1994 album, but it was a terrible fiasco. He left a message at my publisher, David Bowie wants your phone number, and I thought it was absolutely preposterous and didn't answer it. But at any rate, later on, when the Victoria and Albert Museum was planning its gigantic costume show of Bowie's costumes for 2013, I was asked, it's coming from David Bowie himself, to write the article on gender for the catalog of that particular show, which went around the world. It was a staggering response to it everywhere. So it took me really a year to write that piece. It's called Theater of Gender, David Bowie at the Climax of the Sexual Revolution. And what I wanted to establish was not only what an incredible pioneer he was in terms of gender impersonation, gender fluidity and duality, but also I wanted to establish how knowledgeable he was about the visual arts. And that has been, I think, very much neglected in accounts of his life and his work. So I just tried to track down every possible reference he ever made to the visual arts, and I think he was glad for it. Okay, so now let me go on. Okay, let's see. Okay, where are we here? Okay, I'd like to begin. Okay, the screen is black. So first of all, what I've selected. I mean, I could have chosen like 200 images. These are really 50 images of works and eventually personalities from popular culture and so on, that influenced my thinking about gender over the years, okay, that led to my work. So I believe in chronology, so I'm going to show you these works in the order that they were created over tens of thousands of years. But it's not in the order they influenced me necessarily. Okay, so first of all, what we're looking at here is it's only 3 or 4 inches long. Okay, it is the Venus of Willendorf, as it's called, kind of a parodic name. That it dates from, the estimate is 25,000 years BC, it was discovered in a riverbank in Austria. It represents there's a whole series of these, perhaps 40 in all have been found. These portraits of, they're not really goddess, we can't really call them a mother goddess, but it's a portrait of woman, a biological woman, as a symbol of fertility in nature. And looking at it, it's like kind of terrifying in a way. It suggests to us the entrapment of the individual, the entrapment of humanity at that period, totally at the mercy of natural forces, of the elements, struggling for survival. It's a period where the connection between sexual intercourse and pregnancy was not yet understood, and so that a woman, even today, will suddenly start showing her pregnancy long after the actual act of intercourse. So it was thought that in this early period that woman has some sort of internal magical power. And presumably, these objects were created at a time of paradoxically famine. Okay? It's a period where fat is beautiful because fat meant survival. And even early men knew that the survival of the species depended on women becoming pregnant in periods of famine. If women's bodies are too thin, okay, it's very difficult to become pregnant. The body seems to know, it seems to sense the external famine. Now, things here to observe. All of these objects that have been found like this have no feet. It appears as if the feet were made, but then ritually broken off. And people have had no explanation for it. My own explanation is that if these figures represent a principle of fertility, then you stop this being from leaving. Okay? You want the being to stay. The theory is that the great glaciers were withdrawing at this particular moment, and the herds upon which men depended for survival in Europe of that period had disappeared, right? And therefore these objects are just held in the hand to try to stimulate fertility. Now, as a vision of woman, okay, it's like very, very unsettling, because you can see that there is no face. People say, is that a cap she's wearing? Probably not. Probably it's like braided hair coming down over her face. But there are no features. There's no eyes to see. There's no mouth to speak, right? And then you have these, enormous breasts, and then look at the arms are like tiny flippers, essentially, hanging over the breast, as if if you imagine the hand or the arm as an extension of personality, it's an extension of the human impulse, human desire. She's just basically hanging out to herself here. And then these very large, the fat area of the body, and then what's interesting is the way that the legs come together at the knees in a way that is actually seen anatomically in many women. It is a broad-hipped woman. It was obviously being perceived even then. A broad-hipped woman is more likely to survive childbirth in that period. That thin-hipped woman could die in labor. So this is like one of the earliest images. Oh, and I should also mention, you can see the traces of red ochre, okay, on a tint on her chest. She probably was covered with this at the time. Red ochre was also used by Native Americans, okay, including in our own era. In my explorations of the woods, I actually seen a collection of red ochre that suggested to me there was like a tomb area. Naturally, I completely avoided it. But red ochre is, worldwide associated with sanctification in some way. All right, so now let me move on, and I'll show you another example. And so this. What we're seeing here is a work from ancient Assyria. Now, because I was so interested in ancient Egypt, I would be looking at books about ancient Mesopotamian archaeology, and I noted, this is one of my earliest impressions, how different the formulations about men were in terms of male body image, okay, in ancient Assyria compared to ancient Egypt. Okay, so I'm going to show you Egypt next. Okay, so can you see this is actually it's from Nimrud, which was the capital of It's located in northern Iraq, near Mosul. Okay? All these, many of these things have been, of course, excavated by archaeologists in the last 150 years. But notice the musculature. There's like an insistence upon the highly developed male form. You can see it in the calves of the legs and in the arms. Now this is and also the full beard. Again and again and again. That's a sign of virility and strength, right, in Mesopotamian art. This is actually a genie. It's a magic genie who is bringing blessings and safety to the palace. Apparently, there was a whole wall of these carvings in Nimrud. All right. So now let me show you how different it was in terms of the way men were conceptualized or depicted, of men of the royal class in Egypt. So first of all, I'll show you the whole thing, but this is the great pharaoh Khephren, who is actually his face that's on the Great Sphinx. His father was Khufu, who made the Great Pyramid, the largest pyramid of the pyramid complex in Egypt. And and notice how the smoothness of the body, the way the pharaohs are shown, the way the Egyptian men, okay, are imagined. It's like very smooth. There can be some musculature showing, but on the whole, there's no insistence upon the masculine anatomy the way there is in Mesopotamia. And other things to remark here: it's broken, but he's wearing the ceremonial beard that is a symbol of royalty, and as well as the ceremonial headdress. Now let me show you the next, so you can see what's to the side. All right, so here's the statue from the side, and you can see that you have the hawk god Horus caressing and protecting the pharaoh from behind. And then on the side are a series of symbols. I'm going to show you an example in a moment. But the Egyptian pharaohs always project serenity. Okay, there is not. The poet Shelley wrote a famous sonnet, Ozymandias, that I analyzed in my book on poetry, Break, Blow, Burn. He speaks of a fallen statue of Pharaoh with its lips sneered, sneering cold command. That is not true at all. Of course, Shelley would have had no way of knowing what was the style of art in ancient Egypt. But never, are the Egyptian pharaohs shown sneering with power. It's always serene. Their minds are on higher things, on sort of channeling the power of the gods. So to me, that's very interesting. Okay, the way the ultimate masculine ruler of Egyptian society is presented as serene and open, without menace or intimidation. But on the other hand, on the side of the throne here, there's a series of symbols, which are they're actually bows, as in bows and bow and arrows. That signify the pharaoh's dominion, Egypt's dominion over the enemies of Egypt. So war is implied in the throne, but it's not shown. Now, the next thing I want to show you from Egypt, very interesting, is this is the Egyptian god Hapi, Hapi, who is shown as half female. Okay, this is a frequent motif of ancient cultures. Okay, is that fertility principles, fertility gods, are shown as androgynous. Okay, so this is it's a male figure that has pendulous female breasts. I don't know if you can see that, as well as a swelling belly, which can suggest a pregnancy. So it's actually one god here, Hapi. They're facing each other. Okay? This is a very frequent symbol in ancient Egypt, where you have what it's memorializing is the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt, okay? Which began the entire dynastic history of Egypt. That is the series of pharaohs that ruled both the northern part of Egypt and the southern part of Egypt. And you can see that they're binding together Egypt with these symbols of the platforms of ancient Egyptian life. Now, Hapi also stood for what's often called the inundation, that is the annual flood of the Nile that gave Egypt its wealth. and its fertility. Egypt is a desert country, but the miracle of the Nile, the Nile is one of the world's longest rivers, and it annually floods, coming from the melting of snows in mountains in Central Africa. Right? So you have this flood which brings a tremendous amount of fertile silt overflowing onto the land, and that turned Egypt into the breadbasket of the Mediterranean. Okay? It was known for its wealth. The ancient Roman Empire would really depend on the products of ancient Egyptian agriculture. So Hapi is a kind of mother-father figure. That, as I say, is like a persistent motif in world mythologies to have fertility deities represented as androgynous, as sexually dual. All right, so now, the next thing I want to show you is, this is, all right, now, these are, I have a series here to show you actually two views of the same one, and then another one. This is a woman. This is a woman pharaoh of Egypt, Hatshepsut. And when this had these statues had an enormous impact on me when I saw them as a small child. I was a preschool child, visiting relatives in New York, and they took me to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I can remember Egypt, right? In fact, most of these sculptures I'm showing you were smashed, okay, as part of the effort to obliterate her name from history. She was a daughter, of royalty, and had served as regent to one of her sons, right? And although technically stepson, okay, she was the pharaoh to whom she was regent was actually the product of a union between the prior pharaoh and Herod queen at the time. But anyway, she ruled. This very powerful figure. Let me show you another view of her, these sculptures. That's one view. You can't really feel the size of that sculpture as clearly as in the other picture, but you can see this typical joining of a head of the monarch to the body of a lion, which is very typical of Egyptian history. And then here's another object where I think this one is, I don't know if you can see it clearly or not, probably not, but this one you really can see the cracks, the smashing of the sculptures that were done. Now, Hatshepsut, whose name in memory has been recovered, she's very important in terms of architectural history because she sponsored the building of her funerary temple at Deir el-Bari, which is near the Valley of the Kings. That is the first example in architectural history of the pillar forms being used in a colonnade that faces outward rather than inward. The colonnades that faced inward were in temples that were closed to the public except at certain feast days per year. But to turn the colonnade, a series of columns, outward and have steps going up to them is in fact to invite the public, to invite, it's a democratic principle, to invite people up, in. So that is the inspiration. Her funerary temple is the inspiration for every Greek temple, okay, that has a colonnade with a pediment over it, and therefore it is an ancestor, of our own University of the Arts of Hamilton Hall, the symbol of this university, where you have a pediment, the triangle, okay, which is borrowed from the Greeks, but actually ultimately memorializes the pyramid forms of ancient Egypt. So I think this really always impressed me when I was young, this feeling of cultural continuity, cultural history that appears to be lost, okay, but then reappears, over time. Now, the next object has obsessed me my entire life, and that is the great bust of Nefertiti. And this, in Sexual Personae, one of the sort of set pieces of Sexual Personae is where I compare the Venus of Willendorf, who is all body, okay, to the bust of Nefertiti, which is all head, okay, she's bodiless. So you get this amazingly, powerful and graceful wig crown that she's wearing that would seem to be, that was peculiar to, for some reason, this 18th dynasty, which included not only Akhenaten, the rebel pharaoh, perhaps the creator of monotheism, a poet in his own right, who tried to change Egyptian religion and then whose memory itself was wiped out after that. And it's not clear whether King Tut, whose tomb was discovered in 1922, there was like a huge, obviously global interest in that, the treasures of a rather minor pharaoh. It's not clear whether King Tut was the son of Akhenaten, and therefore her son, or whether it was simply a nephew. But at any rate, this sculpture which is missing an eye. You see how they have it posed so that you don't really see the missing eye, the blank eye, which is quite unnerving. People don't really have an explanation for why the sculpture has only one eye. They think that possibly this was a workshop model for the sculptors to look at of the queen to make it, and perhaps the second eye was not installed because the sculpture would only be animated perhaps by her soul when at the entrance of the second eye. But to me, looking at this year after year after year, when I was young, I just would think about the principle of elegance, okay, we're at a point in human history now where it's very clear there is among the aristocratic class of Egypt, okay, a lifestyle, okay, and a construction of feminine beauty, okay, that is the product of leisure, okay, and the product of prosperity, okay, and so I put into my mind. This is why I speak of femininity as an artificial construction. Yes, it's a form of impersonation, but it can only appear in periods, okay, where there is enough wealth and leisure to support it. In other words, the delicacy of classical or canonical femininities. It's a product of affluence, and again you have this pattern of civilizations rising and falling and being destroyed, and then just as in war in Germany, the bombing of Berlin, okay, you had people, very, very sophisticated people, suddenly reduced to almost animal-like, level, and trying to survive, and so the idea of femininity itself as a performance, right, and as an artifact, and it came to me very early because of this Nefertiti bust, which obsessed me for so many years. Okay, so now let's go on to the next thing, and this. Okay, here we have we're going to have a series of sculptures of young men. Okay? So this is a motif that really appears strongly for the first time in Greece. Scholars absolutely agree that early Greek sculpture and art and architecture were inspired by Egypt, and that there was obviously Greeks were visiting Egypt and saw many things, including Egyptian sculpture. So here we have a so-called Kouros statue, K-O-U-R-O-S, okay, which is a youth, an athlete, or a warrior. And now you see, now we're getting not pharaoh, not a king, okay, but we're getting a human being, a beautiful human being, but the sculptors, an ordinary person, okay, but the sculptors haven't mastered yet the art of how to show realistically the musculature of the human body. It will take a while, okay, but eventually the Greeks will have a major breakthrough, as we'll see in our next example. But you can really see the Egyptian legacy here. Okay, this sculpture is standing exactly the way Egyptian sculpture would stand, 1 foot forward, hands clenched at the sides, everything in strict frontality, and even the hair is represented almost as if it's a wig in Egyptian style. So let's go to, now let's see, look what the Greeks do with this motif. This is a statue of Hermes, the god Hermes, who is interestingly presented in a position. This is called Hermes Kourotrophos, okay, meaning nurturer of children. Okay? So it's almost a kind of maternal, because we're talking here about motifs or images where there is some sexual duality. And that's, here he is. He has rescued the infant Dionysus, who has been born from oddly, from the thigh of Zeus. This is a very strange myth that has descended from antiquity. That has to do with the motif of a male mother. A male mother. Zeus had many lovers, human lovers. He was always in ancient mythology seducing women, kidnapping human women, and so on. And one of these lovers of his challenged him, according to the myth, and said that prove that you are indeed the king of the gods. Show me your godhead. And she said, no, you don't want to see it. And then Zeus became God, and she was incinerated. She was incinerated at that moment, but she was pregnant with the baby Dionysus. And so the myth says that Zeus seized the fetus of Dionysus from the womb, of Semele, and inserted it in his own thigh, where the baby came to term. Very, very strange myth, that suggests, again, sexual duality and the ability of a man, in this case, to bear a child. So what we're seeing here is that the infant Dionysus has been born, and the myth says that Zeus requested Hermes to spirit the baby away, to save the baby from the wrath of Hera, the jealous queen of the gods, wife of Zeus. Now, not only do we have this strange, this motif of a handsome young man serving as a nurturer of a baby, but there's another thing here. I've never forgotten, a remark I saw about this exact sculpture in a work of British classical scholarship, which spoke of this sculpture. You'll notice how it seems to be leaning. Oh, I should mention that scholars believe that the upraised hand, he was probably dangling grapes, that the infant Dionysus is reaching for. Dionysus would become the god of wine and nature, with many, by the way, cross-sexual elements, including transvestism in his myths and so on. What's interesting is that you notice, look at the curve. This is called an S curve. The way Hermes is leaning. It's an S curve. In fact, this is a sculpture originally by the great Praxiteles. It's called Praxitelean curve. And there's something about it that approaches the feminine. I think you can sort of see that. But I remember this remark about this sculpture in a work of, again, British classical scholarship, which said about it, even the gods are getting tired, which I thought was really very striking. He was referring to a late phase in the history of Greek art and culture, a late phase. Now, from that idea, I developed my theory of late romanticism, which has to do with 19th century culture. It's one of the major themes of my book, Sexual Personae, which is that high romanticism reveres nature and honors nature, but late romanticism turns from nature and is filled with the messages to resist nature, to defy nature. And so for many, many years, my signature course that I taught was called Aestheticism and Decadence, and it was about this tradition of late romanticism. And our readings began with the Marquis de Sade. This is why I can't teach the course anymore, alas. I don't dare. So it's completely X-rated on every paragraph. So, the Marquis de Sade. It would be Baudelaire and Huysmans, who wrote a book which is translated Against Nature. Against Nature is the name. It's considered the classic, the Bible, the breviary of the 19th century decadence. And then Oscar Wilde. Oscar Wilde was the great proponent. In fact, there's been no one who's been more influential on me than Oscar Wilde. When I was 14, I think, I stumbled on a book called The Epigrams of Oscar Wilde in a bookstore in Syracuse, New York, where I was raised. And it was simply a series of, it was like a British book, and it was just a series of quotes from Oscar Wilde's essays and his plays that was so, today we would call it anti-PC, unbelievable, okay, devastating statements, okay, that are very useful even today. For example, I think I looked one up the other day. It's something like, philanthropic people lose all sense of humanity. It is their distinguishing characteristic, which is like very interesting, and I never fully understood until recent years. Right? And then another line was, whenever people agree with me, I feel I must be wrong. Okay? Which encourages people to be dissident thinkers and speakers, you see. Right? And one thing after another. There was one I loved that where he said, football, and by this he meant rugby. He said, football is all very well as a game for rough girls, but it is hardly suitable for delicate boys. Okay? And I thought that was absolutely amazing. Of course, in those days, women were not playing athletics. That was one of my mottos throughout college. All right. So now, let me go on. Okay, to the next. All right. Now here's this tradition of the beautiful boys of Greek and Roman antiquity. This particular head is like bronze. There was probably no body attached to it. It was probably displayed on what's called a Hermaic pillar. This was dug up evidently in Herculaneum, which was buried by the explosion of Vesuvius, okay, with the same explosion that destroyed the city of Pompeii. Right, so this is it's a magnificent example of Greek bronze work. I think they're considering it Roman, 50 BC, something like that. Right? But you can see the remnants of copper, okay, on the lips, okay, which you have a kind of redness on the lips. And probably there were, for sure, enameled eyes that have been lost. But it's a vision of and he's wearing a crown that suggests that he is a winner at the Olympic Games. But there's this valorization of young male beauty that is one of the strongest traditions in Greek and Roman art. It goes all the way down to the Renaissance and beyond, as we'll see in a moment. Now let me show you another example, and this is a bust of Antinous, Antinous, who was the lover of the Emperor Hadrian, okay, the Roman Emperor Hadrian. And there are many examples of these portraits of him. Let's go to another example here. And this is actually the same bust we were just looking at. Right? The Emperor Hadrian had a wife, an empress. And it was expected that he had a family, and evidently they all traveled together. But he had a major love affair with this young man who was from Bithynia. It was called. It's a region in modern Turkey, very near where Istanbul is right now. Hadrian evidently met Antinous when Antinous was like 13 or 14, and then they became inseparable, and he became kind of the official lover of Hadrian. Then something happened. It's all very mysterious. They all were together, including the wife, the empress, on the Nile, taking a voyage up the Nile. And Antinous was drowned. Right? So then what followed from this, okay, was his deification. Antinous was deified and became the center of a cult, okay, throughout the ancient Mediterranean at that time. In fact, people speak of the cult of Antinous as a rival to Christianity in that period. There's a very famous novel, much honored novel called The Memoirs of Hadrian by Marguerite Yourcenar, who was a French writer, a lesbian, who came to the United States and lived with her lover Grace Frick on an island off Maine. Okay? It's to be recommended. This very famous and honored novel with all kinds of philosophical themes in it. Again, so called Memoirs of Hadrian by Marguerite Yourcenar. She was the first woman voted to be a member of the Académie Française, that is the French Academy. Now, let me show you the next example of Antinous, where Here he's presented as the god Dionysus, as the cult of Dionysus. Probably again, there are enameled eyes that are now long missing. But if we were, to just glance at this, first we would think it's a woman. So you get this androgyny, as a theme of androgyny, of sexual duality that accompanies the cult of the beautiful young man created by ancient Greece and continuing today as well. So I'll show you some other examples as we go along. All right, so next, here, this is a popular motif in ancient art of the later phase, really, probably, of the Roman Empire, or the Hellenistic period. This is a hermaphrodite, okay? Hermaphrodite is a figure in myth. Agrmaphdite. Okay, so we're looking at hermaphrodite was the Hermaphroditus was the child of Hermes, whom we've seen before, and Aphrodite, the goddess of love. And this bizarre myth, it's not entirely clear what the origins are, that the nymph Salmacis, Salmacis, fell in love with Hermaphrodite and essentially bonded with him in this swimming in the spring, right? And eventually, what we're getting is a kind of fusion of two different individuals. Now, people wonder what the origin of that myth could have been. There's been speculation that there was a certain spring that whose waters were said, for whatever reason, to be enervating or putting you to sleep, something like that, possibly. At any rate, there are many different versions of this. What we're looking at here is the version of the Louvre, and let me just show you the vision from above. Okay, and now this is the map. Now I'm not showing, because it's a public lecture. I'm not showing you the view from the other side. If you walk around the sculpture, you can see that what appears to be a woman from this angle is actually has a male genitalia from the other side. Now the actual mattress, that this figure is lying on is later. This is it's when this sculpture was dug up in Rome. The owner of it was a Cardinal Borghese asked Bernini, the Baroque sculptor, to produce a mattress for this as a pedestal for the sculpture to be displayed on. Okay, so now let's look at another odd motif from the Hellenistic period, and this is the so-called Ephesian Artemis, the Diana of Ephesus, Ephesus, which is a major city in Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, that was a target of early Christian proselytizing during the spread of Christianity, because it was the center of this major cult, to a very peculiar form of Diana. Okay, so here she is. And normally we think of Diana as a huntress, but here she is clearly being imagined as some sort of fertility goddess. It's not entirely. No one really knows what the meaning of these odd protuberances were on her body. Now, unfortunately, we've got a pot at the bottom here in the Vatican museums. That does not allow you to see her feet coming out. Her body is really what's called mummiform. Okay, she looks like a mummy. Okay, she's totally bound. There are
Me Too movement is not smoke, but we are a blizzard. We are a generation of people with hair.
Where did you get your doctorate?
I don't know. I don't want to. I kind of want to stay. It was like, attention. I threw both of the paper airplanes Damn, just like that. I'm so hyped. I'm live. I am live as fuck. I don't know, but I'm living. Fuck this.
Everyone, the alarm has activated. Until we find out what is causing the alarm, we're going to have to follow like we would with any fire drill. So we need to exit the building. Please follow the exits. Thank you.